Welcome back to TK Tennis. So in today's video, we're talking about the 3 forehand styles that every player must know, and that's not clickbait. If you've seen the previous video, getting your racket back early is the biggest myth. And it's where I showed many professionals don't get their racket back early and instead take their racket back and forward in one singular uniswing. But there were some people in the comments that said there's not just one way to hit the ball. And that's what gave me the idea to do this video, where I wanted to show you what happens even before that part of the process. In most YouTube videos, you'll see a lot of videos talking about coiling and uncoiling or wrist lag or using the entire kinetic chain. But there is something fundamental that comes even before any of those biomechanics, and that is how you approach the ball in terms of your preparation. I like to use the word approach instead of preparation. And my analogy would be like an airplane coming in for a landing. There are many ways you can mentally and physically approach landing an aircraft. You can come straight into the runway, you can come in off the base leg, or you can enter the pattern and land. And in similar fashion in tennis, there are 3 particular ways to prepare for the ball. And it's important that every tennis player understands which approach they're using. And in today's video, we're specifically talking about how do you approach your forehand. And on one side note, I think this is one of the most consequential videos you're going to see from me. And if you like this video, please remember to like and subscribe and even share this video with other tennis players, because I think it's that important and you won't see it anywhere else. As you can see here on the screen, there are 3 types of approaches. One is the measured approach, the second one is the natural approach, and the third one is the early approach. Let's review each of those in slow motion, and then I'm going to talk to you about the pros and cons of each. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is the measured approach. And we have Adrian Manarino from France that is going to show us. Now, he is lefty, so you need to keep that in mind. All right, here's what you need to pay attention to. As soon as his opponent strikes the ball, you're going to see Adrian starting to bring his racket back in a very slow but smooth fashion. So you'll see that before the ball is coming over the net, he starts to bring the racket back. So it's a unit turn, and he just continues to take the racket back a little bit further. But you're going to notice the ball bounces right here. And what I want you to pay attention to is notice that his arm is facing towards his side and it's not facing towards the back. It means his swing is abbreviated. You're not going to see his backswing go too far behind his body. You'll notice that he takes it back slowly and then he transitions into his forward swing. So let's watch that one more time. The ball's coming towards him. He brings the racket smoothly back and then he transitions right to a forward swing. So in essence, this is also a uniswing where the backswing and the forward swing are one singular motion. All right, now let's take a look at the natural approach. And here we have Sebastian Korda. And the natural approach is what the vast majority of professional tennis players do. And in that video where I said getting your racket back early is the biggest myth, this is what I was showing, that most of the pros wait for the ball to bounce before the majority of the backswing and forward swing happens, which is also a uniswing. Now, as his opponent strikes the ball, notice that Sebastian has not started his turn yet, where Adrian Manarino has started his turn. Now you have Sebastian taking his unit turn, and as the ball bounces, now you're going to see his arm come back even further. So instead of where Manarino is going forward with his swing at this point, Sebastian is going to take his racket back even further into a full backswing, as you see right here, and then he's going to transition to the forward swing. So it's one fluid motion, but it's a bigger swing where it relies on a full backswing that comes back behind the body, as you can see here. And you can see the difference between what Manarino is doing and what Sebastian Korda is doing right here, where his racket is much farther back. Now we're going to jump to the early approach. And here we have Etchenberry, who's a great example of this. So as his opponent is striking the ball, watch how quickly that Etchenberry is going to bring his racket back. Now the ball has not bounced yet, it's just crossing the net. And you'll see Etchenberry, so his hands are fully away from his body, and his racket is, in the old saying, his racket is back and prepared. And you can compare that to Sebastian Korda here, and his racket is not back and it's not fully prepared. He's just beginning his unit turn. And the same thing for Manarino right here. The unit turn has been made, but the racket is not in a back position or in an early preparation stage. Now we're going to move this forward a little bit and watch Echenverry. His racket is fully prepared. The ball has not bounced yet. Now it's going to bounce, and notice that it's at a complete standstill. It is fully prepared and it has stopped, as opposed to the measured approach, where the natural approach, where it's one continuous motion, or as I like to call it, a uniswing. And now he decides to swing and strike the ball, and that is the early approach. Now let's watch a few players in full speed. Let's start with the measured approach and Adrian Mannarino. Racket smooth, slow take back. Watch it on this next shot, the forehand. It's a slow take back. His arm stays to his side. He has the wrist lag, and he strikes the ball. Now in full speed, nice and smooth uni swing. That's an abbreviated swing. Now let's take a look at Sebastian Korda with the natural approach. Ball bounces, full swing, one fluid motion. Once the ball bounces, full backswing, and full forward through. Now let's watch Carlos Alcaraz, also with the natural approach. Ball bounces, full swing, full backswing, full forward swing. Bounce, full swing. Now let's take a look at Serena Williams with the early approach. Watch how quickly her racket gets into the full back position. So she doesn't wait for the ball to bounce. She's already in a full preparation state in the early approach. Now we're going to come back to the measured approach, and we're going to watch Carousel, who also uses a very smooth, deliberate, and compact swing. As soon as the ball's hit, he's starting to bring the racket back slowly but smoothly. And now we're going to see Echenverry again with the early approach and the full take back. Full take back and swing. Now before we go into the pros and cons of each one of those, I also decided to hit each one of these strokes from a side angle using myself as the subject. Notice the early approach where I'm fully prepared, my racket and hand are far away from my body. The natural approach where the ball is bouncing, and then you're going to see me take a full swing. Notice how my arm is lagging far behind my body, versus the measured approach where my arm is more towards the side and I'm doing an abbreviated swing. Let's talk about the pros and cons to each, and then talk about which one of these approaches should you be using. So the measured approach, the pros are it's a compact swing and it's easiest to hit the ball out in front. Now the positioning is also important because the measured approach keeps the hands closer to the body and it's easier to move. The farther your hands get away from your body, the more you inhibit natural movement. Now what are the cons for the measured approach? It's a potential lack of easy power. Since the backswing is not as big, some people may have trouble generating more power because you don't have as much momentum with a big backswing. And it's also harder to generate spin for, once again, because you don't have as big of a backswing. So you may not be able to generate heavy topspin like some players that use either the natural approach or the early approach. But make no mistake about it, you can still hit spin effectively with a good wrist lag, like you see here with Mannarino. Let's move on to the natural approach. What are the pros and cons? Well, the pros are, the name speaks for itself, it's the most natural. It's sort of the bounce, hit, or bounce swing technique. And the reason I call it the most natural, because if you've ever watched a beginner tennis player that knows nothing about tennis whatsoever, they will move to where they think the ball is going to be, and they will wait for the ball to bounce, and then they will take a backswing and a forward swing. No matter how underdeveloped it may look, that's what they do. They wait for it to bounce and then they swing. And that's what most of us are taught at a very early age, is to let it bounce, then swing. So this is why it tends to be the most natural approach. Now, another pro is it's easy to generate power, being that it's timing based, bounce, swing, and it uses the entire kinetic chain from the ground up. Whereas the measured approach, it uses less lower body and it uses a little bit more from the waist up, where the natural approach drives from the ground up. And another pro to the natural approach is that every style, the modern forehand, the next gen forehand, and even the gull wing forehand, are all common within the natural approach, meaning the bounce hit technique. So no matter how you have your racket positioned in terms of your wrist being pronated, whether it's high, whether the racket's high or whether it's low, or whether the wrist is pronated, or whether you have a gull wing high elbow style. All of those styles fall within the natural approach and the bounce hit technique. Now, the cons of the natural approach are potentially with bad timing, you're more likely to hit the ball late than you do with the measured approach. And the reason is because you have a bigger backswing, you have more opportunity to hit the ball late and not get the ball out in front of you, like you would have an easier time with the measured approach. And it may be difficult for some beginners, even though it's natural. Some beginners may feel like they want to get their racket back and prepared earlier. I generally advise against that because getting your racket back earlier gets your hands farther away from the body, which makes it harder to position yourself properly. And it's sometimes maybe harder for players with less athleticism or starting out later in life. All right, let's go to the early approach and talk about the pros and cons. The pros are a big swing offers the opportunity for big power. So because you have the racket prepared so early and the racket is far away from your body and the hands are far away from your body, if you hit it properly, you can swing really big and generate big power. And you'll notice that with people like Serena Williams, who's known for a lot of power, and even Etchenberry here, with proper technique, you can hit a lot of power. And simply, some people may find it to their liking getting the preparation done early, even though it seems a little bit less fluid. Now, what are the cons? It's less fluid and it has less momentum because the racket is typically coming to a stop and go, and it's not a uni swing. It has a separate backswing typically and a separate forward swing. And shots are harder to disguise. When you get your racket back earlier, it's easier for your opponent to see where the ball is likely to be hit because the racket comes to a stop and they can see when you start your swing. And of course, because it's such a big swing, you have more opportunity to hit the ball late and mistime the ball. So you'll see more mishits with the early approach than compared to the natural approach or the measured approach. And the biggest drawback, I think, with the early preparation and the early approach is that it inhibits movement. And this is the biggest problem. In the 70s and 80s, the early approach was the most common approach in tennis. But since then, movement has become even more paramount in professional tennis or even recreational tennis. And if you get the hands far away from the body, it is just less effective or it inhibits movement and it's harder to move efficiently compared to the other two approaches. And for me, I think that's the biggest reason that most people should stay away from the early approach because it inhibits movement so much. If you ever noticed, if you get set really early and your racket back, it's hard to move. You sort of get planted onto the court. All right, so I think there's only one question to answer is which approach is best? And there is no such thing as best. It comes to which one is the most efficient. And that really depends. Each person may be a little bit different. But the fact is, most professionals and most recreational players do use the natural approach. Sometimes they're not even aware of it, but they wait for the ball to bounce and then take a backswing and a forward swing in one motion. If you're a beginner, an early stage player, you may find the measured approach to be really nice and effective because it has a more compact swing and it really promotes hitting the ball out in front and worrying about your contact and how you address the ball versus a big backswing, which gets a lot of people into trouble in the beginning stages when they're learning how to play. So I would say for many people, the measured approach might be a nice way to go, especially if you're starting later in life. You don't have to worry about a big swing and it probably requires the least amount of athleticism because everything is a little bit more simple. Just like in the pro ranks, most people probably should be using the natural approach or the bounce hit mindset because it is the most natural. Either one of the measured or natural, you can't go wrong with either one of them. What I like about the measured approach is that you can easily graduate to the natural approach from the measured approach over time. So you might start with a measured approach or even practice a measured approach and then move on to a natural approach. That is not the case with the early approach. This is the one that's the most forced, where you have to be taught to create a habit of getting your racket back early. And when you do that, it's harder to switch to a measured approach or a natural approach. Getting your racket back early really inhibits movement, so it's something that I don't like to see. And I think most recreational players should be using the other two types of approach. However, like many people say, there is no one way to hit a tennis ball. So if you're someone who's more comfortable getting your racket back early, by no means should you change to a measured or a natural approach. At the end of the day, these things are all personal preference. But choosing one of these approaches is fundamental to how you play tennis. Everything else in terms of biomechanics and kinetic energy from the ground up, whether you're driving with your feet and the coiling and uncoiling of your hips and your shoulders and the wrist leg, are secondary, or it comes after this. It's really important for you to choose an approach type, get comfortable with that, and then you can add on the full biomechanics or the kinetic chain. So that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching. If you want to contribute to the channel and you want to buy me a coffee, or I like to call it buy me a string, you can do so in the description. You'll see a link to buy me a coffee or buy me a string. And remember to like and subscribe. And if you like this series of videos and you want me to do more on the backhand or the serve or even the overhead, let me know if you found this informative, and go out and pick your approach and play some more tennis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next ace.